All right, folks. Good evening to everybody, and welcome to dinner. I want to thank everybody for showing up. The board, the India Advisory Council, thank you very much. Honorable Minister Jaishankar, we're delighted that you are here and that you have graced us with your presence. I would say about Minister Jaishankar that he has been not only in these recent years the foreign minister, the external affairs minister of almost 1/5 of humanity, but he has also been an extraordinarily skilled practitioner of the art of diplomacy and of foreign affairs. So it's a delight to see him here, a great friend of U.S. IBC and of the United States, a true architect of so much that has been achieved by India in the past few years. Friends, I know a lot of you have traveled in from all over the world. I thank you sincerely for that. I also particularly want to thank the Americans who have traveled in, who have sacrificed their Labor Day weekend. It is nice of you to join us here in Delhi. We decided to be a little bit ambitious with this gathering. It's our first gathering since the pandemic. It is our first gathering in New Delhi since 2015, and it is, I think, the biggest gathering of the United States and India business, trade, and investment crowd, certainly in a very long time, and certainly this year. So friends, it means a tremendous amount to me that you've all gathered. And what I'd like to do now is introduce my boss. Myron Brilliant is the Executive Vice President of the United States Chamber of Commerce. And he is also the head of international for the U.S. Chamber. The Chamber, of course, is the largest business and trade association in the world. It represents the might of American business. Myron is a great friend, and he's a great supporter of the U.S. IBC program. He flew all the way here to be with us, and I want to thank Myron very much for coming. It is through his support that we are able to host all of you and bring this gathering together, and he will say a few words before we turn it over to the next speaker. Myron, please come on up.
Well, Atul, as always, you're way too generous in your praise. But let me just start by thanking him and the entire U.S. India Business Council team for putting on what I think is going to be a spectacular program over the next couple of days, and I think a very timely program. If you think about world events today, and our Minister for External Affairs is certainly going to mention those external events. If you think about the context of which we come here today, for many of us, the first time traveling to India since the pandemic hit, the importance of this relationship, the deepening of economic ties as part of a broader geostrategic dialogue between our two countries, the private sector presence in India and the United States and its commitment to this relationship is amplified by the presence of this forum over the next couple of days. So I want to thank Atul and his team for their leadership and their strong support of this relationship. I'm a little off script here, but I want to thank Ed Knight, who has stepped in at this critical time in the U.S.-India relationship to chair the Council. And Ed, I want to thank you and the entire board that is present here, Vijay and others, for your strong commitment to the Council, to the U.S. Chamber, and most importantly in this context, to the U.S.-India relationship. So thank you, Ed. You know, in 1996, little known fact, I actually ran the U.S. India Business Council. Then it was just two people. It was myself, one staffer who would end up going to graduate school at Penn, and no one else. And it was a small council, although you could see the future of the council because you could see the future of the U.S.-India relationship. Today, the council has a robust staff here in India. It has grown in size and stature, and it reflects very much how far our relationship between the two countries has grown as well. And I was looking back to 1947 and thinking about great moments in 1947. And you'd be surprised how many things happened in 1947. The IMF was launched. One could argue the beginning of the Cold War. George Marshall, the Secretary of State at the time, launched the Marshall Plan. By the way, Miracle on 34th Street. Anyone seen that movie? 1947. Bing Crosby's White Christmas, 1947. And many other important events, cultural and otherwise. But no event was more significant than the development of India as a nation. The launch of India as a nation has transformed not only this region, but the globe. And you see how far this country has come to lift people out of poverty. You see the strength of this economy, you see the strength of the government, and you see the resilience of the people of this country who have come through difficult times, including during COVID, and you remark on how fast this country has grown in size and played an incredibly important role on the global stage. And while we were not here in early August to celebrate India at 75, we are here tonight to celebrate its achievement, to not only recognize its fastest growing economy in the world, but also the largest democracy, and one that our companies are fully invested in. I want all of you to understand that our work here is not possible without the strong support of the companies. And I want to just announce and thank all the sponsors of this forum over these next few days. And thank you all, including our chairman, Ed Knight, for the strong support that you have provided the council for this forum. I'm not reading much of the speech that I was given, so I apologize to those speech writers. Let me just stress a few points and then turn this over to the appropriate next guest. Let me just say, as the United States and India think through strategically where this relationship is evolving and developing at a time of geopolitical uncertainty, rising tensions in the U.S.-China relationship, concerns over the war in Europe, rising inflation, concerns around supply chains, emerging debt around the emerging economies around the world, and many other factors, we have here an ambition to grow the economic relationship as a foundation, a bedrock in the overall relationship between the United States and India. Today, official statistics might say $120 billion relationship. We might say 160 to 170 billion. But it's not big enough. It's not ambitious enough. Then Vice President Biden talked about a $500 billion economic relationship between the two countries. But there are opportunities for enhancing this relationship, whether it's through the Quad Initiative, whether it's through IPAF, whether it's bilaterally through enhanced trade relations, whether it's including thinking through the digital age and how we advance digital connectivity between our two countries. There are many levers that create these opportunities, and our organization is committed to enhancing and celebrating these opportunities and to continuing to support our government's efforts in this endeavor. We're confident that the companies in this room are long-term investors in India, not short-term players. We're confident that they are committed to inclusive growth, to creating employment opportunities, to encouraging creative solutions to the climate challenges, to investing in clean technology and transition energies. We are sensitive to India's sovereign right to continue to advance its economy and to govern its own rules, but we are committed to playing a responsible stakeholder role in India's growth and development. And so let me just close by just saying, again, the next couple of days should be robust interaction. We should encourage side conversations to think creatively about the path forward. Our board of directors, our India Advisory Council, committed to the future of this bilateral relationship. I cannot thank enough the hard work of the U.S. India Business Council team, and I begin my closure by just saying to everyone that reflecting on the past 75 years is important, but reflecting on our work in the next 75 years is even more important. And with that, let me just say that I'm very pleased to welcome Arundhati Bhattacharya, the Chairman and CEO of Salesforce India, to introduce the Minister. Because I did not read my notes, I am going to just recognize 3 other participants here tonight. Not only do we have the Honorable Minister of External Affairs, Jaishankar, who has been a regular in these dialogues and a regular to Washington, and we look forward to your visit later this month to Washington. But I do want to recognize other speakers here tonight, the Honorable Minister of Highways and Transportation, Gadkari, and of course, our U.S. Assistant Secretary for South and Central Asian Affairs, Don Liu. Thank them all for participating in tonight's event, and more importantly, for their longstanding contributions to this relationship. And with that, I think the great distinction of welcoming our first guest goes to Arundhati, who is chair of our India Advisory Council and who, by virtue of her work at Salesforce, has made herself an invaluable member of not only this U.S. India partnership, but the talent development and the growth of India. So with that, please come up to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Byron, and welcome everybody. Good evening. I'm Arundhati Bhattacharya, CEO and chairperson of Salesforce India, and I also have the honor of chairing the India Advisory Council of USIBC. Salesforce is the world's #1 CRM company, also one of the fastest growing enterprise apps company. And the reason I mention this is merely during the last 2.5 years, that is bang in the middle or right from the beginning of the pandemic, this company has grown 3x in India to become the second largest hub outside of the US. And I believe that for many companies in this particular group, this is very true. There is no company now or country in the world that isn't talking digital. And the world looks to India for its leadership in this space. And like most companies in my sector, we are deeply committed to growing manifold in India. The talent, along with the open arms that India has always had for global partnerships, are just 2 of the very many reasons. Today, India is really a shining spot in the global economy, and we are rapidly emerging as a global power that cannot be ignored. India has now become the 5th largest economy in the world, overtaking the UK. The symbolism of this development in our 75th year of independence is, I'm sure, not lost on the audience in this room. I'm sure that the American companies present here are all deeply invested in supporting and accelerating India's digital transformation. Our work every day helps deepen and expand a stronger US-India partnership that has no greater champion than the speaker that I am welcoming here, Honorable External Affairs Minister Jaishankar. And it is indeed a great privilege on my part to introduce him today. Dr. Jaishankar has been India's External Affairs Minister since May 2019. His long diplomatic career has made him a well-known figure across the world. In the last few years, he has become one of the key architects of our foreign policy and has made a critical contribution to making India a global force to reckon with, paving the way to several diplomatic successes. Before assuming the mantle of the foreign minister, Dr. Jaishankar was foreign secretary from 2015-18. Prior to that, ambassador to United States, China, the Czech Republic. He was also the High Commissioner to Singapore and served in critical diplomatic assignments in embassies in Moscow, Colombo, Budapest, and Tokyo, as well as in the Ministry of External Affairs and in the President's Secretariat. He's a recipient of the Padma Shri Award in 2019 and has written a widely acclaimed best-selling book called The India Way, Strategies to an Uncertain World, which was published in 2020. Sir, there must hardly be anyone in this room who has not watched some of your recent videos where you spoke about India's place in the world. And I'm sure I'm speaking for all of us when I say that we look forward to hearing your insights on India's future. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the Honorable External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. Jaishankar.
Good evening, everybody. And let me say what a great pleasure it is to address the US IBC's India Ideas Summit. First of all, if they're putting you on a table which has a title of Ahmedabad, they've done something right. So on that note, let me really congratulate you for not just meeting after a gap, but because you are doing so contemplating the next 75 years of our shared prosperity. That not only signifies how deeply all of you are invested in our relationship, but it also speaks of your expectations, which are so high. The transforming relationship between India and the United States is actually one of the big strategic changes of our era. It is reflected in the strong political comfort that we have built across multiple administrations in both countries. It is equally about how we are together shaping regional and global developments, including by creating new mechanisms like the Quad and the I2U2. The defense and security dimensions of our ties have done more than their fair share in this regard. We are a key exercise partner who regularly share policy perspectives and also increasingly equipment and technology. That a nation which had virtually no defense trade with the United States for 4 decades is now operating multiple American platforms, that too with very impressive capabilities, is perhaps the best statement of how far our ties have now come. But it is the societal bond that is really at the heart of this partnership, with the mobility of talent acting as a human bridge. The presence of so many successful Indian Americans with us in this room itself speaks for the diverse aspects of our collaboration, whether it is research and innovation or education and technology. Indeed, there are very few facets of life that does not capture some element of our convergence. It could be arts and entertainment, it could be media and cuisine, or space and medicine. Every day, in some form, there are practical reminders of the growing convergence between us. However, at the risk of pleasing all of you, for me, the most sustainable and steady form of cooperation is that of business. I would not be exaggerating in describing this as the ballast of the relationship, one that keeps a ship steady in the choppiest of waters. And while we are undoubtedly heading for sunny days and very clement weather, there is still a value to it beyond words and numbers. By its nature, business looks at the long term, plans for it, and most important, works for it. It creates, collaterally, a network of relationships that have a larger significance and weight, and not least, it opens up possibilities for other domains that may, in themselves, be more restricted. Now, You are going to, in the next few days, be hearing many other speakers who will rightly tell you how much easier it has become to do business in this country. They would probably also honestly agree that notwithstanding this improvement, we still have some ways to go. They would talk to you as well about the silent revolution that has happened on the ground in these last 3 years, how using our digital backbone, a safety net was rapidly created that financed and fed people on a scale that is difficult to imagine. Or indeed, how in domains like health, housing, agriculture, energy, water, and sanitation, results have been delivered that run into millions. Our COVID vaccination story is one that tells its tale most graphically. But this period has not only been about meeting the legitimate needs of the vulnerable and deserving, it has also seen an energy and an enthusiasm that has lit up the economic landscape of India. The challenges of providing credit, of giving support to SMEs, of encouraging innovations and startups, of promoting greater exports, all of them have been vigorously addressed. Now, I mention them less to speak of achievements and more to underline the confidence of an India that you are currently visiting. We are today a partner ready to engage the world more fully and capable of making greater contributions in a vast range of domains. Having said that, it is really from a strategic perspective emanating from my own jurisdiction that I ask you to contemplate the significance of our ties. By and large, governments don't do business in our societies, but they encourage, they facilitate, and they shape them. I would emphasize that it holds even truer when it comes to businesses between our two countries. Our responsibility as a government is, for sure, to improve the enabling environment. But it is even more to make a credible case for why our collaboration should be deeper and vaster. And that is what I propose to do briefly. The world today is not just in transition. In truth, it is in turmoil. That is because long-standing trends of economic and political redistribution and balancing have now intersected with specific disruptions, whether they be of pandemics, of conflicts, or climate events. As a result, there is a fundamental rethinking about the nature of the current globalization model. We have seen during the pandemic, and even otherwise, that supply chains are not as reliable and resilient as we could reasonably expect. There is unmistakably concentrations of production that pose risks to the global economy, whether they be by policy or by events. These are further magnified by the uncertainties created by climate events. Neither levels of production nor predictability of supply can be taken for granted any longer. It is rightly said that just in time has now given way to just in case. A different challenge emanates from the world of data, now so critical in our digitized world. Where our data resides and who uses it are no longer subjects of agnosticism. Trust and transparency are key factors, whether we are talking of telecommunications, smart grids, or just the apps that we download every day on our phones. This is not just in our own economies, but even more relevant when it comes to international collaboration and exchanges. So in such times, the compulsions for India and the United States to work more closely together becomes even stronger. Americans need to ask themselves whether it is in their strategic interest, or indeed that of the international communities, that the Indian economy develops more rapidly. After all, the emergence of additional engines of growth and multiplicity of sourcing clearly help de-risk the global economy. Just doing plus ones may no longer be enough. We have all seen that economic rebalancing has had political consequences. So the quest to engineer a more favorable strategic landscape inevitably includes building up long-term partners. Now, you can easily imagine what my answer and that of my government is to this concern. Our endeavors to improve the business climate and to incentivize manufacturing in India through the PLI initiatives are concrete examples of our thinking. At the same time, we are confident that with growing familiarity and contacts, the natural complementarity between India and US will assert itself. Designing, engineering, and producing in India can have a scale and cost that is truly attractive. And as the campaigns of innovation and startups spread more extensively through our country, this holds true for inventing in India as well. From the government side, I can only state that you will see the fullest support in terms of larger policy when it comes to deepening this collaboration. This is already taking place bilaterally and will surely be stepped up. I would invite you to assess the changes underway in India and identify what they could imply for your own business prospects. For those long grappling with the infrastructure side, the Gati Shakti National Master Plan opens up new avenues. Similarly, the asset monetization initiative puts ambitious proposals on the table. The digital economy has developed its own momentum, promoting technology solutions for a vast range of established activities. The payments platforms have a particularly impressive record. Accessible telehealth and education have now come into their own. A new education policy puts a premium on global collaboration. And I could just keep on talking about startups in space, our drones policy, geospatial technology initiatives, the blue economy, green hydrogen, and so on. The short point is that a more energetic and innovative India now offers new partnership prospects. The flip side of this is for the Indians to ask themselves the merits of investing more in this relationship. And if we objectively ask ourselves, where are our markets? Where are the partnerships? Where is the technology? Where is the comfort factor, including sanctities of contracts and observance of international law? I think the answer is pretty obvious. Naturally, major polities like to maximize their options and hedge their bets. But this is not a mechanical exercise, bereft of calculations, oblivious of strategy, or indifferent to values. In a globalized world, everybody will deal with everybody. But what kind of dealings, how much, and in what areas? These are million-dollar questions. The logic of our partnership today extends well beyond the bilateral. Indeed, the three key challenges of our times: green growth, trusted digital, and affordable health. These three challenges are obvious domains for us to work together. In each of them, we have seen a growing convergence in policy making and in outlook. In many cases, whether it is of producing vaccines, intensifying applications, or expanding renewables, we already have a tradition of cooperation. It is for the business community of both nations to examine the horizons and identify new opportunities. But let me also be clear that we deserve something better than business as usual or incrementally more. Green businesses will need a very different mode of financing. energy security may well lead to a complete redefinition of the very meaning of that term. The domain of health could make serious demands of technology that overrides established practices. And as for the digital world, it holds a promise that will become fully apparent only as we travel down that road. Precisely because there are such radical possibilities within reach, it is imperative that those with shared values and concerns make common cause. Looking at the large canvas, it is apparent that our collaboration is also being advanced today through groupings of countries or established multilateral organizations. The Quad merits particular mention in this regard. Further up the horizon is the I2U2 grouping that comprises of another set of partners who are relevant to West Asia, what many of you call the Middle East. Let me dwell first on the Quad because I believe it has much more to show at this point of time. The working of the Quad takes into account the consequences of globalization and the requirements of the global commons. There is undoubtedly a strong shared interest in the oceanic domain as all members of the Quad are maritime powers. In fact, well before the revival of the Quad in 2017, they were conducting the Malabar exercise between themselves. And the same convergence is also underlined in the support they have expressed together recently in Tokyo for the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness and the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. To have an informed visibility of its progress, it is necessary to appreciate the range of issues that the Quad is now addressing. Where critical and emerging technologies are concerned, the Quad articulated in 2021 principles of technology design, development, governance, and use. It urged that democratic values and human rights shape the design, governance, and application of technologies. The adoption of the ORAN Action Plan encourages a diverse, open, and interoperable telecommunication ecosystem. This was followed by an agreement to facilitate exchanges and align closely on ORAN testing activities. The Quad obviously has an interest in the expansive deployment of the ORAN across the Indo-Pacific. In parallel, there have been discussions on the global semiconductor value chain. That the Quad members have come up with a common statement on technology supply chain principles says much of the importance that they attach to this domain. Climate action has been another significant area of attention. Here too, the Quad has applied itself to practical activities. The green shipping network between the four is dedicated to greening and decarbonizing the shipping value chain. Its objective is to establish green shipping corridors across the Indo-Pacific. India has a particular interest in the collective efforts underway on green hydrogen. This is expected to dovetail with its own national mission and other collaborations. The Quad has also partnered the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure in its adaptation and resilient activities. Among the ambitious goals of this sector is to collectively advance climate monitoring and disaster risk reduction in the Indo-Pacific. Infrastructure has been another natural focus given the widespread unease generated by strategically led connectivity initiatives. Recognizing the inherited challenges, much of its deliberations are on debt management and debt sustainability. Quad development assistance institutions are coordinating on promoting sustainable and alternative financing. There is a clear recognition that high standard infrastructure and market viability and transparency should be promoted for the larger benefit of the region. Given the pandemic, it was only to be expected that Quad 2 would come up with its vaccine supply endeavors. We have already seen the production of WHO-approved vaccines, as well as the expanding manufacturing capacity of vaccines in the pipeline. The Quad works closely with the COVAX to track and supply demand, and with the WHO to overcome vaccine hesitancy. On its part, India has provided made in India vaccine doses to Cambodia and Thailand under the Quad vaccine partnership. Other notable areas of cooperation have been the Quad data satellite portal and the STEM fellowships. A different cluster of issues illustrate the contribution that Quad can make to keep the world and themselves more secure and protected. An important outcome from Tokyo was the HADR partnership, the Humanitarian Assistance Disaster Relief Partnership for the Indo-Pacific. This has symbolic significance given the 2004 tsunami cooperation, but it really today has a resonance well beyond. At the same time, when climate events are proliferating and global responses are declining, this will fill a significant gap. Counterterrorism is another domain of cooperative activity, starting with policy exchanges and experience sharing. The potential for mutual benefit is being rapidly explored. Cyber security, too, is emerging as a productive arena of work, sharing model approaches, encouraging development of talent, ensuring supply chain resilience, and security and networking industries are its prominent facets. Now, in contrast to this ambitious agenda and some of the achievements which are already today visible, the I2U2 is a grouping that is still at an infant stage. We have had virtual meetings of its leadership at the summit level, at my level, and an understanding to focus mainly on economic issues at this stage. The first two concrete projects agreed to by the I2U2 actually both relate to India. One pertains to the establishment of food corridors between India and the UAE, and the other to a hybrid renewable energy project. Along with our partners in UAE and Israel, we are keen to enter the domains of innovation and startups while simultaneously exploring business and educational opportunities. I hope US IBC will give some attention to these possibilities. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by highlighting that the India you now approach is a more self-reliant one. You would have heard the term Atmanirbhar Bharat. That is, I must emphasize, by no means a protectionist or an autarkic one. On the contrary, it is an India that seeks to develop greater capabilities, strengthen its own supply chains, excite its innovators, and encourage its talent. But this is also an India that is exporting more, inventing more, collaborating more, and working more effectively with partners like you. So on that note, I thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts, and I wish your deliberations all success in the coming days. Thank you very much.
Minister, thank you very much for those very thoughtful remarks, very comprehensive remarks. You have helped chart the course of U.S. India relations for 20 years. And I think we can thank you for the current level of trust and confidence between our two countries. You and many others have worked to achieve what we have now. You mentioned in your remarks that then Vice President Biden had articulated a desired goal of $500 billion a year in trade in goods and services between the United States and India. Currently, we're somewhere between 120 and 150. 160. Very good. I like that number. So I'd like to ask you, sir, do you think we can achieve that goal? And if you do think we can achieve that $500 billion goal, given that this room is full of people who have invested in each other's countries very heavily, what is the pathway, in your view, to achieving that goal?
I think the part of the pathway is the U.S. IBC.
Here. Turn this down. Okay.
Yeah, sure. I think part part of the pathway is the US IBC. That's the short answer. The longer answer is, if you look at the last year, the year which is just completed, you actually see a very big pickup in India's exports. In fact, we had set ourselves a target of $400 billion for exports and goods, and we exceeded that. My sense is a lot of the changes which have happened during this COVID period, different kinds of changes happened, and I'm sure other speakers will talk about it. I would urge you to kind of explore it with them. There were changes in terms of policy reforms. There were changes in terms of businesses tightening the belts and doing things which they should have done long time ago. There were changes in terms of what the banks did during this period. But there were also, I think, there was a better understanding of the value of domestic supply chains, the need for support to small and medium businesses. The country is far more digitized today. To me, the really big story in these 3 years, the COVID story, in a sense, masks or overlays what is a larger digital story. A digital story where, whether it's the government's, from my perspective, obviously, we look at the social delivery, the key programs which today we can deliver in the millions because of the digital backbone. But if you look at how digital our daily lives have become, whether it's education, whether it is shopping. So my sense is, if we harness this change in the making, we're going to get to that 500 billion level faster. So we'll also have to keep revisiting and re-exploring and kind of reimagining what are the possibilities. But at the same time, I actually see an enthusiasm today in the relationship. I've tracked this relationship more or less. I started with the US when Ronald Reagan was still the president. Okay, so I'm not sure how many other people in the room would compete with that. But yes, possibly. I see an enthusiasm today. I see an understanding. I see a willingness to work. And I think that'll make a big difference too.
Well said. Sir, you will recall an era when diplomats referred to South Asia and East Asia as if they were two completely different sets of regions and countries. And you have put a lot of effort over the past 2 decades and more into creating a consciousness about the Indo-Pacific, a holistic understanding about the entire region. One of the things that makes me most happy about U.S.-India relations is that we are both members of the Quad. And I would love to get your sense of how you think the Quad may help chart the future of U.S.-India economic and investment and trade policy, including our technology cooperation.
Atul, the beauty of Quad is actually its nimbleness. It's very we kept the lawyers away, okay, during the time we were doing the Quad. So the result is that it's actually a very practical, comfortable kind of way. So what Vani and Don do, have a telephone conversation and then things begin to happen, okay? So what I would, in a sense, people should not expect the Quad to do things for which the Quad is not purposed. This is not going to be, one where you're going to have protracted negotiations and structures and what we normally associate with an organization. I think it's a very light touch. It's a very deft touch. It's coordinate, guide, point, understand. That's the kind of environment or objective that we are looking for. And if you look at some of the examples, the reason why I actually devoted that much time in Quad to my own remarks was, if I look back at where we were at the New York summit, and between New York, the New York summit, sorry, not New York, Washington summit, and then the Tokyo summit, and look at the practical things that we do. Because sometimes, the Quad is defined by people who don't like the Quad. And we should not allow that. The Quad is actually a gathering for doing good. I think a lot of people, not just the participants, I think the whole region has a lot riding on us. Because the day when any single country can sort of take on the world's burdens on its shoulder, I think we all know is behind us. So it should not be that therefore nobody does, everybody gives it a free pass. So I think Quad can contribute. You can see that, say, in 5G. You can see that in infrastructure. You can see that in strategic critical minerals. So I can see a lot of economic issues happening there. Now, aside from that, of course, one interesting development, and we really don't quite know where this is going, but all of us are hopeful, is the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. I think there are discussions which are taking place this week in the U.S. So my colleague Piyush Goyal has gone there. And obviously, we would like to see how that moves forward. All Quad members are part of it, but of course, it's bigger than Quad.
Well, you anticipated and stole my next question. So I'll ask on behalf of all of our member companies. We have 200 plus member companies, American and Indian, trillions of dollars of market cap, hundreds of billions of dollars of available investable assets, millions of employees in both of our two great democracies. What advice, sir, do you have for them about their role in the U.S. India corridor?
Well, I don't know if I would give advice, but I would certainly say, and there was a little bit in my biodata which I think somewhere kind of got lost, which was a brief corporate existence that I had, which I still miss from time to time. But my honest sense is, if the there's a kind of a dynamic between people doing the business and the larger relationship. Every business success adds to the relationship. Every time the relationship grows, I think the sort of the tailwinds for any business get better. And I mean, certainly today, anybody who's in this room, if they reflect on it, they are helped by the larger goodwill of India-US relationship. But they are also responsible for that larger goodwill. So I think making that dynamic work would be the best thing which the US IBC could do. And I know that is the mission of the US IBC. I can only say, as someone who has gone back to foreign policy for a living, that I really meant it when I said that I believe that business is the ballast, that it is a steadying factor, it is a contributing factor, it is a focusing factor. And what, the spread impact, the ripple impact of what business does for a relationship, particularly ours, because we are very, big, diversified societies. And a lot of it is word of mouth, it is networking, it is, I know somebody who knows somebody. And there, the role that all of you play is really something very important. I value that greatly, and quite honestly, that's one of the reasons I'm here.
I thank you very much for that sentiment, and I appreciate the fact that you've come and graced us with your presence. You've been very generous with your time. Having left government and gone into the private sector, I can say with assurance that the travel vouchers and expense reports are a lot easier. But I hope you'll permit one question from the audience, if we still have time for that. And I'd like to ask our interim chair, Mr. Ed Knight, who is the executive vice chair of NASDAQ, who has 5,000 companies listed, if he might ask a question. Ed, if you could approach the microphone that's near you, thank you very much.
Well, it's an honor to have you here, Honorable Minister. We're excited about the prospect of working even more closely with your government. Can you say a little bit about how you view the relationship between the current administration and yours in terms of communication and openness and dialogue?
What level of superlatives do you want? So, and by the way,
With the secretary here, that's what I wanted to hear.
yeah, no, it's not an entirely facetious answer because very candidly, I think almost everybody senior in the administration, starting with the president himself, there was a history of working with them. In many cases, senior people in the administration are personal friends. They're people with whom, autonomous of whatever happened in the politics of either country, they've stayed in touch with each other. So, to a large extent, I think the prior history, the personal relationships made a big difference. But having said that, I also, sort of step back and say, okay, let me assess this administration very clinically as I would do any other government I'm dealing with. And my view of them is that from the very time they came in, they looked at the world. They had a understanding of both the history of the world and the history of the United States and all that, that means in terms of their responsibilities and obligations. But at the same time, they had an awareness of what has changed. That, the US cannot do in 2020 what the US could do in 2000 or 1980. So they, I think, have striven to find a balance between, what the US has been and is, and what the US should prepare to be in the face of these changes in the world. And to put that simply, it really means obviously working the alliance system well, repairing ties where necessary, but looking for partners and friends, going beyond alliances, working very flexibly, and I think that's really what is making a difference. I mean, these are really, I would say this quite honestly. I mean, these are very, these are not people who are dogmatic or who are wedded to something simply because that is the way it was. I think it's really good to have very sort of open-minded people who understand change and are trying to sort of address it most effectively. So I think that's one of the reasons why really in the last 2.5 years, the relationship has done so well.
Thank you.
Yes, but that's absolutely the last. Yeah.
I'm going to ask my boss, Myron Brilliant, the Executive Vice President of the U.S. Chamber, if he'd like to ask the last question of the Honorable Minister, and to thank you again, sir, for your time and your generosity in coming and gracing our occasion. Myron.
I'm going to keep this very short, Honorable Minister. First of all, thank you for being here today and for your encouraging comments about the private sector and the role of the U.S. IPC, and I'd say the larger organization, the U.S. Chamber. Let me ask you to look out 5 years from now. What defines the relationship 5 years from now? Not today, but what changes, what evolves in this relationship to even strengthen it further in the next 5 years?
5 years from now, as per our trends, we should probably be close to being the third largest economy. We will almost certainly be the most populous country in the world, and that's not a demographic brag. It will have psychological consequences. We will very definitely, I think, in a sense, externalize more in terms of our economy. All of us will be much more tech-driven than we are today. I would suggest each one of these factors actually points in the right direction for our relationship. So I'm pretty confident that, 5 years from now, whoever is in my place, if Atul is good enough to invite them, they would probably use even warmer words and have greater achievements actually to show at that time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We, on behalf of the entire membership, we have planted trees to honor your presence here in the Sundarbans, and we hope that they grow, like India, to become mighty and prosperous and happy. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.